All right, safety fans, we're about to get into some pretty intense stuff today. Working with cranes is already a pretty serious job, but when you throw power lines into the mix, well, let's just say the stakes get even higher.
No kidding.
And that's exactly why we're diving into OSHA Regulation 1926.1410 today. It's all about those situations where you absolutely can't avoid working closer to power lines than we'd like. Those safe distances everyone relies on.
Yeah, this regulation basically kicks in when all the ideal options are off the table. Like if you can't de-energize the lines, you can't move them. You're stuck with that risk.
So it's like the last resort playbook for
Right.
crane operators and safety pros, right? When you're in that unavoidable danger zone.
Precisely. And, the first thing this regulation hammers home is planning.
Oh, absolutely. Planning is always important, right?
Sure, but we're not talking about your average pre-shift toolbox talk here. This is serious, in-depth planning.
Okay, so paint me a picture. What does this super planning actually involve?
Well, first of all, it's got to be a collaborative effort. We're talking the employer, the power company, sometimes even a qualified engineer, all coming together to hash out a really detailed plan.
Whoa, hold on. Multiple parties, all working together before any work even starts. That's intense. What are some of the key things they're focusing on in these planning sessions?
A big one is the automatic re-energizing device. If the power line's got one of those, they've got to figure out how to disable it during the operation.
Oh, right. Makes sense. Because if that line suddenly, jolts back to life while there's contact with the crane, talk about a nightmare scenario.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster. And a disabled re-energizing device is just the first step. There's a whole lot more that goes into this safety plan.
Okay, so let's unpack it. What else are they looking at?
Well, another really important piece of the puzzle is the dedicated spotter.
Ah, the spotter, of course. So important in any crane operation, but especially when you've got power lines in the mix, I imagine.
Absolutely. They're basically the crane operator's second set of eyes, constantly making sure that crane stays clear of those lines.
Right, they're like the human safety net, always watching, always communicating.
Exactly. They're trained to communicate super clearly and quickly with the operator to, make sure they never get too close to those lines.
But, with all the moving parts in a crane operation, how can they be absolutely sure about the distance? I mean, judging that gap accurately in real time,
Yeah.
that seems incredibly difficult.
Oh, it definitely can be. Estimations alone aren't enough, that's for sure. So that's why they incorporate visual aids.
Visual aid. Okay, I'm intrigued. What kind of visual aids are we talking about here?
Well, think like bright paint markings on the ground or stanchions. Sometimes they even use landmarks in the area. Anything that helps the spotter and the operator gauge those distances.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about the spotter's judgment. They're given clear, reliable visual cues. Smart.
Yeah, and they take it a step further with warning lines. Highly visible lines to mark out that no-go zone around the power lines.
So you've got the spotter, the visual aids, those bright warning lines. It's like they're creating this multi-layered safety bubble around the crane. What other safeguards are built into this plan?
Well, one you might not think about right away is the insulating link.
The insulating link. Okay, I'm not familiar with that one.
Yeah, it's basically this little device that goes between the end of the load line and the load itself. It acts like a barrier if, God forbid, contact does happen.
So it's like a last line of defense against that electrical current. Interesting. I bet most people have no idea that even exists.
Probably not. But trust me, it can be the difference between a close call and a real tragedy. And of course, there are very specific rules about these insulating links.
Oh, I bet. So what are those rules? What makes a good, reliable insulating link?
Well, for starters, they have to be rated for the voltage of the power lines they're working around.
Right, of course. That makes sense.
And they have to meet really strict safety standards. In fact, there's been a big push to phase out some of the older, less reliable insulating links in recent years.
Wow, so it's something they're constantly improving upon then. That's good to know. So on top of the planning, the dedicated spotter, now we've got this hidden safety net in the form of an insulating link. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Right. It's all about layers of protection.
Exactly. But what else goes into keeping everyone safe in this kind of, high wire act?
It really is all about having those layers, those backups. And, it goes beyond just the big, obvious stuff. They really think about every little detail.
Oh, I bet. Like what kind of little details are we talking about?
Take the tagline, for instance.
The tagline, you mean like the rope they use to help control the load?
Yep, that's the one. If there's even a slight chance that tagline could drift near the power lines, it's got to be non-conductive.
Wow, that's attention to detail.
Yeah.
They're really covering all their bases, huh? But what about the people on the ground? How do they make sure the whole work area is safe?
Good point. Well, that's where the barricades come in.
Yeah, makes sense. Keep everyone at a safe distance.
Exactly. They set up a perimeter, ideally at least 10 feet out from all the equipment.
Yeah.
Just creates a clear boundary. It keeps anyone who's not directly involved well away from the danger zone.
So it's not just about protecting the crane operator then. It's about everyone on site.
Exactly. Everyone's got to be safe. And speaking of the operator, what about if they're controlling the crane remotely? That's going to add another layer of complexity to things, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because now you've got the operator who's not even physically in the crane. So how do they factor that into the safety plan?
Good question. In those cases, they have to use either wireless controls that isolate the operator from the equipment, or they have to make sure the operator's standing on those insulating mats, the rubber ones.
Oh, yeah. So even though they're not right there in the crane, they're still protected from that electrical current. They've really thought this through. Is there anything else in this safety plan that really jumps out at you?
Let me think. Oh, one that's really crucial and I think often overlooked in other scenarios is grounding the equipment.
Oh, right. Grounding. That's important for preventing electrical shocks, right?
Exactly. It makes sure that any stray electrical current gets directed safely into the ground instead of, flowing through the equipment and potentially zapping someone.
Makes sense. It's such a basic principle, but so important in a high-risk environment like this. Kind of like that extra layer of insurance, right? Anything else specifically addressed in the plan, or have we hit all the major points?
Well, there is one more. It's called the insulating line hose, or sometimes cover-up.
Okay, insulating line hose.
Yeah.
That's a new one for me. What is that exactly?
So this is something the utility company actually installs on the power lines themselves. It's like this extra layer of insulation that further reduces the risk of any accidental contact.
Wow. So they're even adding protection to the power lines on top of everything else. They're really pulling out all the stops here.
They are. And it's not just about, coming up with this plan and then just assuming everything will go smoothly. This regulation is really big on documentation and communication.
Right, because a plan is only as good as its execution.
Right, exactly. The procedures have to be written down, readily available on the job site, and everyone involved has to review them. The operator, the crew, the utility workers, everyone's got to be on the same page.
It's not just a plan, it's a shared understanding. And that's so important for building that safety-first culture.
Absolutely. And to make sure things run smoothly, they designate one person who's, kind of in charge of the whole operation. They have the authority to stop everything immediately if anything seems even slightly off.
Oh, wow. That's a big responsibility. Sounds like a crucial role, though. Someone who can make those tough calls when safety is at stake. So we've got the plan, the communication, the designated safety leader. Anything else this regulation really hammers home?
Well, they also recognize that things don't always go according to plan, right? Even with the best preparation. So there's a huge emphasis on flexibility and constant risk assessment.
Right. You got to be able to adapt on the fly. It's not a set it and forget it kind of deal.
Nope, definitely not. So if something unexpected pops up or if the plan just isn't working,
You got to hit the pause button, right?
yeah, work stops immediately and they reevaluate everything. They might need to come up with totally new procedures on the spot or, even have the power company come back and de-energize those lines before they can even think about continuing.
So adaptability is key. It's about staying aware, staying vigilant, and being willing to adjust the plan as needed. And that's a valuable lesson for anyone working in a high-risk environment, not just around power lines. What else do they highlight in this regulation?
Let's see. Oh, one thing that often gets missed is simply following the manufacturer's instructions for all the equipment and safety devices. Sounds obvious, but it's crucial.
You're absolutely right. Even the best safety gear in the world is useless if you're not using it correctly. It all comes back to that attention to detail, doesn't it? Is there anything else we need to cover in this deep dive into OSHA 1926.1410?
Just one more, and it's a big one. This regulation stresses the importance of training. Everyone involved in the operation needs thorough training on the hazards of working near power lines and, on these specific procedures we've been talking about.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Everyone on that team needs to be able to spot those risks, to understand what's at stake, and to act accordingly. It really does all come back to that culture of safety, doesn't it?
It really does. This regulation's not about, just checking boxes on a form. It's about understanding the danger and taking it seriously. Making safety a priority.
We've talked about so much today. Everything from the obvious stuff like spotters and warning lines to those little details you might not even think about, like the insulating link or making sure everything's properly grounded.
Right. It all adds up,
It's amazing to see how many different things come together to keep everyone safe when you're dealing with something as powerful and as dangerous as electricity.
It really makes you appreciate the complexity of it all.
It does. And, think about everything we've discussed today. It makes me realize there's a bigger idea at play here.
Oh, what do you mean?
Well, it's about respect, I think. Respecting that invisible danger of electricity.
That's a good way to put it. It's easy to forget that we can't see it or hear it, but the consequences of a mistake?
Yeah.
Well, they can be pretty awful.
Yeah. No room for complacency when you're working around power lines, that's for sure.
Nope.
Safety's not just a checklist. It's a mindset. It's a commitment to doing things the right way every single time.
Absolutely. And this regulation really gets that. It lays out this whole system that's designed to keep people safe.
And, for our listeners out there who are crane operators, safety pros, or even thinking about getting into this field, this deep dive is a great reminder of how crucial it is to know the regs, to understand the risks, and to take those precautions. Every single one.
Couldn't agree more, because at the end of the day, it's all about making sure everyone goes home safe.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And for anyone who wants to learn more, to really dig into the details,
definitely take a look at the full text of OSHA 1926.1410. There's so much valuable info in there.
It's the ultimate guide to staying safe around power lines.
Yeah.
And hey, don't forget to share this episode with anyone you know who works with cranes or around power lines.
Good idea.
The more people who know about these safety measures, the better. All right, folks, that's a wrap on another deep dive. Stay safe out there.